Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Sorry for the delay. Just had to button up a few things. As you can see, we have one additional person. We usually have 3 or 4 people on, but today we have 5 because it's such an important month. We are talking about PTSD awareness. If you haven't joined us before, my name is Sandra. I am the PR and development person over at Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. And every month we do these lunch and learns, trying to really just break down different topics of interest in hopes to help our community, which is, the entire community. I think, these things are so valuable to really kind of break down ideas and concepts. Sometimes when, people that are working in the field are speaking, things, get a little to the point where you do need that breakdown. So we're doing that today on PTSD awareness. And joining me today are Joanna Mupanduki, Katie Honeywell, Mary Beth Diaz, and Christine Wolf. Before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys do a quick intro of who you are and where you're from, and then we'll hop right into our questions. And so I'm just going to start with Joanna.
Hello, I'm Joanna Mupanduki. I'm the Deputy Director here at Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. So I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for 17 years now. I've been both a prosecutor and a victims' rights attorney. So that's me.
Thanks, Joanna. Katie?
I'm Katie Honeywell. I'm the Business Development Director for Trauma Specialist, but I'm also a therapist and consultant, and I specialize in PTSD and complex trauma, and we do a lot of EMDR, which I'm sure we'll touch on today at our practice.
And EMDR, can you?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Thank you. And then I'm going to go out of order. Sorry, Mary Beth. I'm going to go to Christine just because she is from the same organization.
Hey there, I'm Christine. I'm also from Trauma Specialist of Maryland. I'm also a psychotherapist specializing in trauma, complex trauma, PTSD. I do work with children as young as 8 months all the way up through adults. And I am also a psychology professor, teaching both at the undergrad and grad level, and often teaching on stress and trauma and what it does to our body.
Wow. Thank you so much. And then Mary Beth.
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Diaz. I work for Jenner Law, but we also work very closely with the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center. We currently are handling a lot of the childhood sexual abuse cases now that the new Maryland law went into effect October the 1st, even though we are under a constitutional challenge, but we are fighting that, and we are continuing to represent and advocate for victims of childhood sexual abuse. I am trauma trained in speaking with new clients and have been doing that since November of 2022.
Thanks so much, Mary Beth. So thank you all for being here today. We're talking about PTSD, and so I just wanted to go ahead and just start basics. What is PTSD? Who experiences it? And what does that look like?
We're doing the mute,
unmute.
Yeah, mute, unmute thing to be polite with each other. For one of the, I think like in 2020, it would say like 5% of adults have been diagnosed with PTSD. I think that's probably a little bit more. And there's different forms of trauma that doesn't quite fit into the DSM, which is basically a book that has a whole bunch of different disorders in it, for those who don't know what the DSM is. But really, when someone has been diagnosed with PTSD, they have experienced something that was shocking, dangerous, unexpected. Either they have experienced it themselves, or they've been a witness to it, or had someone close go through that situation. And one of the best ways that I've ever understood it is our brain and our body has a lot of power to process a lot of things. But when we're impaired because of a trauma, that can't always happen. And so that event ends up getting stuck in a like a state response. So the sensory items from that experience is stuck almost like in present day, like your body can't get past that this isn't happening anymore. And so that impairs functioning for people and creates a lot of symptoms.
And so I think a lot of us, I originally, when I was younger, you associate PTSD with movies where soldiers were they called it shell shock back in the day, right? And it was like they were at war, things were happening. And then I think the one movie, and it's so funny because I used this movie as an example before, and you can really start telling my age when Born on the 4th of July, where he goes off to war and he comes back and he's in this shell shock state. People are like, what is that? What movie is that? I'm like, oh God, I can't even talk to you. But it's, he comes back from war. He's just he just can't get, like you said, like unstuck out of this really traumatic experience that he's trying to process and figure out and figure out how he lives in today's world. Mm-hmm. And it's, come a long way since that, because I think that movie was the 80s or something like that. Maybe the early 90s, maybe. And, it's come a long way because I think that society as a whole and science and medicine has determined that, it's not just that, right? It's not just war. It can be traumatic events that we all have learned about, like these crimes and traumas. And one of the things that we talked about when we were discussing all the different topics, because this is such a wide topic to talk about, was big T, little t.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
I thought you might be leading there. So big T traumas are the ones that, like you just talked about, like in the movies that a lot of people are pretty familiar with. There's a little less stigma around them now than, even there used to be still a lot of stigma of like, wow, it's over, right? Like get over it. But that's before we knew that this was something that was like a physical thing stuck in your body. So those big T traumas are typically seen as like natural disasters, combat, a car accident, like tornado, like, big things that might happen one time, although that's not completely true either. And then little t's, which I don't love the term little t's, but I didn't invent it. And I'm just going to keep going because a lot of us know what that is. So our smaller traumas, and that might be, it can really be anything. It just depends on how your body reacts to it and the capacity that we have for a situation. So that could be a conflict. That could be an abrupt move. That could be me tripping down the stairs and seeing my life pass before my eyes and it's really fine and I just scraped my knee, but in that moment I thought everything was gonna not be okay. It could be any of those things. It could be like financial issues. It just depends on, how your body experiences it.
Thanks so much for that. And yes, I think I agree with you in saying little t's. It's like, we don't want to diminish people's feelings, and people have the right to kind of feel the way that they feel and seek treatment or help in processing that information. So we definitely don't want to diminish it by calling it little, but at the same time, trying to decipher those events and how people kind of deal with them.
I'd love to jump in, if okay, to also touch on the relational piece of little t's. And so we can see, again, called little t, which I think probably Katie and I both cringe a little bit because we see the impact long-term on this. But we can see a little t where perhaps a child was told that he could have done better on the math test that he brought home, and maybe even called stupid. You didn't try hard enough, you're lazy, you didn't try hard enough, from the parent or caregiver. And over time, we can see these impacts of relational little t trauma where the child isn't in imminent danger. However, they're growing up with caregivers who may be harsh, may not be seeing the child's needs, may ignore the child's needs. And we can see those impacts, that chronic stress of feeling a bit unsafe in a relationship.
Absolutely. And they're stickier. So they tend to happen over and over again. And so in that way, they kind of add on to each other. And when it comes to like those relational pieces, like we're supposed to be relational. So if like we go way back, like we're supposed to be in a village so we can all depend on each other. And if our parent is rejecting us or our community is rejecting us, especially if we're coming, back from a really bad situation, that's going to make it all the worse. And yeah, We'll have to, maybe by the end of this, we'll be able to coin the term, like what we like better than big T and little T trauma. And so, can we have community chats, like people can rename it in the chat as people watch us? So we'll do a little call to action and see if we can.
Yeah. No, and I think that it's so true, because you think back at children and how we kind of interact with them, and making sure that we're very cautious about the words that we say. And I remember, and I've used this example too. I just feel like I say the same things a lot. So, if you've heard this,
no judgments,
is highly spirited child, because I own one of those, right? Like, I have a highly spirited child. And I remember people would be like, oh, he, and it would be all these, like, him being mischievous or whatever. And I'm like, he's highly spirited. Like, he really was a very happy child, and he liked to explore and do all these things. And I loved reading that book when he was younger, because it really kind of like spun the concept for you. But back to, what Christine was talking about, with children, you never really know how things are going to be received by another person, and how that affects their growth, and self-esteem, and, all those important things that sometimes come back to bite us later. So definitely important. And thanks for bringing that up. So how does PTSD in any shape or form, how does that usually manifest? Like, what would we be looking for as just people that are living our lives? What does that look like? And I'm going to pick on Mary Beth here shortly, but I'll let you guys go first, and then I'm going to pick on Mary Beth.
There's this quote that I really love from Bessel van der Kolk, and he talks about trauma as having not been something that just happened in the past, but it's left an imprint. And so when I think about PTSD, I'm looking at the present day imprint of what happened to them in the past. And we can see a change in their nervous system response, how they might respond to similar things to the trauma, but other things as well. We're seeing potentially a higher level of irritability or reactivity as their nervous system has had this really significant change from the trauma. We're seeing difficulty with sleep, difficulty with nightmares. We're seeing kind of this replay of what happened, or complete avoidance of what happened. It tends to be one end or the other, where we don't remember what happened and we're not going to talk about it, and we're not going to go anything near that might be similar, or we might not be able to get it out of our head. We are at dinner eating hamburgers with our friends, and this image keeps flashing in front of us, and we can't get it out. And so we start to see with people who have that PTSD diagnosis falling on one end of the spectrum, where their nervous systems are so overwhelmed that they either cut off the memories, can't think about it, or they can't stop the memories.
That's very well said. And I think that where that shows up for people when you're interacting with them is like you don't always know that's going on. So that person can seem really edgy. If they're lacking sleep, they're going to be even more edgy and irritable. And they might be a little bit more elevated in the fact that they are maybe interpreting things in a different way because they're super vigilant of what happened. They might have a lot of worth issues of like blaming themselves or blaming other people overtly for what happened. And so they're carrying some guilt and shame too. And Mary Beth, I know that she said in the introduction that she's often, talking with people who've experienced, really big things. So I imagine that she's experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, the big thing that I've noticed in speaking to survivors of childhood sexual abuse and childhood abuse is that as adults, that's who I'm talking to, is the adult version. Some have continued to see that trauma throughout their lives, and a lot have repressed the memory, put it in the black box, and then the black box opens up, and then that's who I see. I see them as that child who can't tell anyone what happened to them because no one would believe them, or doesn't want to tell anybody what happened to them because they don't want that whatever happened to them, attached to them as a person going through their lives. So I see it in a couple different forms. I see it as that child that continues through life with that trauma just stuck, literally stuck inside. And then once we get to the point where we have someone that hasn't spoken, I mean, I've spoken to so many people who have never, ever told the story of what happened to them, and they're telling me for the very first time. It opens up a completely different level of that emotion. Now they see that the trauma that they took on at night. They'll wake up and maybe they see that person that traumatized them or abused them in the corner of the room. They know in their logical mind, in their adult mind, that person's not there, but that's what they tell me that they feel. And I believe with 100% certainty as a daughter of a survivor that these things are real to them. I mean, this is real. This is something that hasn't been addressed. This is something that hasn't been able to work through with someone such as Katie or Christine or any type of therapist, counselor, person, supporter, advocate. But yeah, I see it in different shapes and different forms. So I don't like to always say to people, oh, well, you don't have PTSD. That's not your diagnosis, because I'm not a therapist. But a lot of people say they don't have PTSD because they didn't live it, the trauma throughout their entire lives. Well, really they did. They just didn't recognize it until the box was opened. So that's what I see a lot of, and I'll talk a lot to people that have gone through those steps.
I also want to note the movies do a really great job of talking about triggers, where the veteran that comes home from war hears a car backfire and he starts to have flashbacks, and he always knows, and the viewer knows, and the family knows why his little black box has been opened. For many trauma survivors, it's not that clear. For many trauma survivors, there's a very subtle sensory cue that causes their body to remember something from the trauma, but they don't always know what it is, why they're having a flashback, why that little black box creaked open and popped a new memory out for them and then slammed shut. And so this can be a real difficulty for people who may not really understand that they have PTSD, because they may not be saying, I know that these are flashbacks and I know that this is what's going to cause the flashbacks.
So I think it's definitely such different aspects as far as you ladies that are working, in the field. People already come with diagnoses, right? Whereas like with Mary Beth, people are, I don't know, they've just been so used to, like you said, keeping it in this box that, they don't even realize. They're just kind of going through life and they're like, oh yeah, this is just kind of how I am, versus, dealing with those situations. So, it's so interesting what the years have come where, mental health is important, and it's such an important thing now. And for us that are a little bit older, you're like, oh yeah, it is kind of important, isn't it? Like, yeah, like, you've just been kind of like packing things away in this box, right? Packing it in. And, this generation is like, hey, let's, self-care and do all the, and you're like, oh, what a concept, right? It's like, seems like it's such a new concept. And so now it is harder to find someone to help you, because now everyone's like, yeah, that's important. Let's try to care for these things. And so you guys are in such different, we're all in such different worlds when it comes to dealing with these things. And there's so many different things to look for, right? Like you were saying, like some people are closed off. They're not talking. They've packed it away. They've shut the box, the keys hidden somewhere, and they've buried it and built a house on top of it, and, done all the things. Whereas, some others are just really ready, and they've spoken and they've spoken and they've spoken. So there are so many different things to look for as far as frozen or not frozen, and, shut down and not shut down, and all these things. And I think that's what makes it complex, right? Like you think that someone is, oh yeah, they're handling it fine. Well, no, might not be the answer, right?
Definitely not. There's even different types of responses that people can have to trauma. Like when we look at the PTSD diagnosis, that feels a little bit more activated in our fight or flight response. But there's also like a fawning response, with which I would imagine Mary Beth might come in frequent contact, because it's the type of trauma that she's working with her clients. It's like something that's happened throughout her lifetime, maybe often with someone you know. And so you have to figure out different ways to survive. And so you might have what we call, like, I don't like this term either, but we're going to work on some different terms today, but like a fawning response, or that shut down, where someone can be like, oh, they just don't want to talk, and like they're being difficult, or they're being resistant, or like they're joking a lot, like, no, they're fine, or like they're best friends with like the person that did this or whatever. And it's really like those are different survival responses. And so having people trained at different the different jobs that they have, where they're having people come in to help them, is really important. And it sounds like what Mary Beth does. So that way we can get people to feel safe about talking about people. So it starts really there, and then everyone having resources so they can maybe get to a therapist or someone trained, which you're right, it is hard to come by therapy sometimes for a lot of different folks, especially these days.
And I do want to jump in and touch a little bit on how it may show up for children, where parents may be saying, okay, hey, I know my child went through this trauma, but they're fine. They, they don't want to talk about it. They don't need to talk about it. They don't remember.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I was like, they don't remember. That's like, I hear it all the time.
Whereas maybe they don't remember. Maybe it did happen prior to where they could remember, but their body remembers. There's still an imprint on the nervous system that we still need to help support. And maybe it's just so far back in that little black box, but we're doing them a disservice to allow that black box to stay closed, because it's going to open someday. And if it's not through the help of a therapist, it's going to open in probably an inconvenient way. So for anyone out there who sees those children, birth through 18, who have gone through something, and you're thinking, my kid's probably fine, though they're not talking about it. They have tons of friends there. Or maybe they have unrelated behaviors, send them into therapy. It can manifest differently in children, but their bodies always remember the trauma.
Thanks for that, Christine. And that's so important as well. So I guess, I've got this list. You guys know I've got this list. So diagnosis. What if you don't know that you have PTSD? What if you just think that it's normal? How do people get diagnosed then?
It happens a lot.
Yeah.
They come in saying, I don't know why I can't sleep. I thought I should go to therapy. I think I'm anxious, but I have no reason to be anxious, but I'm here for therapy. It absolutely happens. And sometimes it's pretty quick, where they're ready to hear about the connection to the symptoms that brought them in, to maybe chronic traumas, or maybe a single point trauma that they thought they were fine from. Sometimes it takes months or even years for them to be ready to hear this connection and the diagnosis.
Wow, that's interesting. And then we've got a comment from Alonzo. He's one of our attorneys. How does one respectfully broach that conversation when you're not a therapist? So friends, family, like you see something in someone and what does that look like? What do you suggest? I mean, I know, Mary Beth, you probably are a little bit more on that end, right? Like where you see it and people are still in that denial phase, or?
I mean, it's a very, very, very delicate and kind of boundary situation for me, in the fact that we want to talk about it. We want to get the information that's needed for our purposes and for their purposes, in the realm that we're handling cases for victims of childhood sexual assault and abuse. But you have to be very, very, very careful in broaching those subjects, because once that box gets opened, if it's never been opened, you then have opened that person up. So then they are there raw. I mean, you're basically looking at you're speaking with a human being, whether it be by Zoom, by phone, in person, where this is all a new experience for them. They're actually bringing this out. And the worst case scenario is don't bring it out and then say, oh, well, okay, well, we can talk about this again next week or maybe tomorrow. I have another appointment that's scheduled. You can't leave. It's okay to open the box with them, but you have to know where you are with that person. You have to keep them within, I call it within my cube, so that like I said, I'm not a therapist. And while I am a compassionate and sensitive and want to help person and will help hopefully get you to the right people, you have to be extremely careful with people who are not or haven't been in that position where they've opened up that trauma and they literally relive it. I mean, they relive it in front of you. I've had it happen many times, and it's a difficult situation to be in. So right setting, right timing, and having the right resources and making sure that person has a support, whether it be a support group, a family member, someone that after you're speaking with them, they can then go and know that they have someone to support them and they're not just out there on that island by themselves.
Yeah, like a safe place. Joanna, did you want to add anything to that? Because I know you've probably also dealt with a lot of like our clients on our side and them dealing with their cases.
I have. And I think oftentimes it's helpful to suggest, do you want to maybe talk to a therapist about this? Because it sounds like a very difficult situation that you went through. And perhaps the right place for you to do that is with a therapist. And so, I mean, kind of say it a little bluntly, but just to let people know that, hey, what you went through was very difficult. And perhaps this is something, you want to talk with the therapist about, and then, come back and let me know what I should know from it. But oftentimes, the attorney or the friend doesn't need to know everything. And you can always point them somewhere. Now, I have people who want to tell me it all and think I'm that person. They can tell it too. And so that's okay too. That's always a good place to start. But I try to kind of direct them to someone who could actually help them more than just someone listening.
Yeah.
And one more thing I just wanted to add, I just thought of it when you were talking, Joanna, was as the person that is speaking, it's important to recognize this is on their terms. We're not pushing. You can't have expectations of anyone that you're speaking to or that may come to you that has suffered trauma. You have to be, this is their narrative. This is their story to tell. And if they want to tell you August of 2000 and then stop, then guess what? That's what it is. Right now, it's August of 2000 and you stop. It's very, very important not to push, because then you get to that place that I was just talking about where you've opened this big box and you're not the resource that they need to handle that trauma.
Absolutely. I love a couple of things I want to pull out, because this is great being a therapist and hearing other people in different fields talk about it. But the choice that you gave, the follow-up, the openness and kindness, and helping them get to somewhere where, they can get help, but also like being really, like you put out there that you're really grateful for that. Like, oh, okay, like tell me what you want to tell me, and here's where it would be really great to go, and then let me know what you need when you come back there, or let me check in next week, or do you have a friend? Those pieces are really important. I would say that another piece that you shared, Mary Beth, specifically, of like that capacity, like that is a really big moment sometimes, like when they're like 2020 and that's all that can come out, and people don't always recognize that. Even in our field, if they're not trained, like people can be trauma informed, but there's a difference between being trauma informed and trauma trained. I've heard many well-meaning, wonderful therapists who are hopefully trauma trained now, where they're like, I just want them to talk about it. And it's like, well, like if they talk about it, that's going to light up that network, and then they might have a flashback, or their whole week might be completely derailed and they're not okay because you didn't really know that it's less about talking about it. And we got to do that in little pieces. And for this, I hope everyone hears, please, one, make sure that someone's going to a therapist that's trauma trained, but also that like we don't dive into this stuff. Like for our practice, it's really important to have the whole process to be trauma informed, trauma trained. Even our admin staff who are taking phone calls or answering emails are trained. And we're not diving in that first moment. A lot of people are really scared to go to therapy because they're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to, like, the story goes through their head of everything they're going to have to share. But for a long time, we're talking about, you know, maybe baseball or like how annoying the car ride is over. And it's not any of that stuff. Like, we really want to get to know you. We really want to have an idea of like where your capacity is and like how you really go through life with the skills that you have now, and really help improve that or increase those before we're going to get into any of the hard stuff. And you're always in control. So spread that to all your friends so that way it's a little bit less scary to come to therapy.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And one of the words that I wrote down when Mary Beth was talking was boundaries. And, you know, it's another really important word that's come out with this, you know, with the mental health and self-care generation. Like, I feel like it's just, like I said, this new thing where it's like, you know, it's okay to create those boundaries. And Mary Beth clearly is realizing that, you know, when people say words or they linger, you know, they're processing at the same time as, you know, trying to provide information, and just realizing that that boundary is there. But, and the other thing that was with Katie, you were talking about is like, you know, those stigmas and barriers and all those other things. And, you know, a lot of what I've seen in the small things that we've been trying to do as an organization to kind of promote, you know, healing in our programs for Paths to Healing is the gender barrier, where, you know, even with our homicide support group, it's a lot of females. It's a lot of females that are ready to process information. You know, we're such sharers as a whole anyway. You know, even in couples, like you can see that the woman is usually the one that's like creating those relationships and really kind of trying to solve problems. And then we have our men who, you know, historically, they don't share. They're not sharers, not as a whole. We have some that kind of have to pave the way for the others. And we find that in our community as well, where, you know, some of the men are like, you know, it's okay to talk about feelings. And you're like, oh, it is? Oh, yeah. And so just making that a norm, and there not being like these different sides of like women can share and men can't, attached to the stigma of mental health that, you know, we've been slowly trying to break down as a society, and make sure that everyone is kind of dealing with, you know, what they need to deal with to kind of be in a healthy space.
Yeah, it really starts early with the gender bias.
Oh, did we lose her?
I think Christine froze.
I think she froze off.
I'm wondering if because we're such close colleagues.
There's so many men who grew up with all things. Oh,
you froze a little bit. You might want to replay that.
Our internet here, once in a while, and it's between 12 and 1, it just resets.
Take a break.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier, I was like, gosh, I'm lucky it hasn't happened. I just wanted to point out it's really an important job that we have when we're raising young men, to be careful in our languaging with them. So many have grown up being told boys don't cry, you know, and being told like, be tough, like you got to be tough. And these have really
brush it off, right?
Exactly. Yeah, these have such long-term impacts. Many men feel the responsibility of being a provider for those around them, and they feel like it's one or the other. You can either be the provider or you can have feelings. And so we do really want to start very young with all the boys that we're raising, to give them very clear messages about our acceptance of their emotions.
Thanks for that, Christine. I definitely appreciate that. It's definitely something I've had my eye on, especially raising two sons of my own. I think, I always tell them that you get to have all the feelings that you have, and that's okay. Like, you get to feel all the things.
Yeah.
And, just really, I've got to start at home because I own them. They're mine. And just trying to, spread it where we can for our young people. Okay. So we were talking about before that sometimes other forms of therapy, as far as therapy is concerned, other forms of therapy are sometimes received a little bit better, especially early on when they're just kind of opening that black box that Maribeth talked about. Sometimes those other forms are a little bit easier because people aren't ready to process verbally. And verbal therapy is, I think, the traditional therapy, but even, men, women as well, like, it's boxed up and they have feelings that they're processing. So sometimes those other things are a nice way to kind of segue into other therapies. We are offering, I'm in a little plug, at the end of this month, we have our Healing with the Herd, which is a horse therapy that we had last year, and we're having this year on June 30th. We've talked about other forms as well. And I think this is when, Katie, you were talking about the EMDR, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that and other forms of therapy?
Good job. You just made all EMDR therapists really happy because
I had to write it down. I really did.
No. Let's just pretend like you just did it off the cuff there. But yeah, so EMDR therapy, and you heard me earlier. That's why we pretty much strictly stick to the letters. It's a type of therapy that we use to help process that stuck information that we're talking about. There's 8 phases to EMDR therapy. And so you're going to go through all of them. You're not jumping right in, reprocessing. You're learning a lot about the client. But once you get to the reprocessing part, it's where you're paying attention to the not so great stuff that happened. You don't have to share verbatim what's happened. Like, you're giving your therapist highlights so that way they know, is this going well or is this not? And it's not going well. We need to change some things up or do something to make someone feel a little bit more comfortable or be able to process a little bit easier. And so when you're not having to verbally say these things, that can make it a little bit easier to process. There's other types, which actually Christine and I are both trained in, but it's definitely a passion of hers. And so I'll let her speak to that a little bit because I can feel it in her body that she wants to share about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll also touch on the fact that we can do this with children, which I know was not what Katie was leading up to, but we can do this with children. I've done this with children as young as 8 months. It certainly looks different when you're doing it with really, really little ones, but it is really incredible. In fact, I'll show you. I have this cute little scale that I can use with a lot of my children to ask them to tell me like what those feelings feel like inside their body when they're thinking about some of these hard experiences. And just last week, I had a little go through a very, specialized program for children. And his went from feels like a giant storm in his body to a rainbow when he thinks about that hard moment. And it's really just incredible to get to see the healing that can happen in these young bodies, even when they don't have language. And this particular client didn't even have memories of it. He was so little. So I do want to make sure that everyone knows if you have littles and think they don't remember or think they're too young to engage in talk therapy, EMDR can do this really incredible work with them. What Katie was leading up to, though, was group work for EMDR. So there's some wonderful programs that we can do for people who have experienced trauma. Perhaps there's an earthquake or a hurricane or a school shooting, and we can go in and take a group of people who experienced that and work them through the steps. It does look and feel a little bit different, but we can capture a group of people, which of course is much faster. And then there's a training that we can do for people who continue to experience trauma. So these kinds of trainings are wonderful for first responders, for doctors and nurses and medical staff during COVID who had to go through doing these really hard things and knew that the next day they were going to go back into it and do the same really hard thing. And that, again, is another group protocol. So for those of you that are curious and know that there's a group of people who might have experienced something, we can work with everybody together in a way that doesn't require them to verbally process to the group, of course. We have some specific check-ins that we as the therapist do to make sure that we're bringing their intensity down of those hard feelings, but it's certainly not verbally processing to the group.
Yeah, I love that. And I absolutely love the idea of group therapy. I think it's kind of like an easy way to kind of dip a toe in versus full-fledged like one-on-one, which can kind of be intimidating. So thanks for bringing that up. I definitely wanted to talk about before we've got about like, I don't know, we got about 20 minutes left, I guess, but no, 15 minutes left. Talk about some of those additional barriers. I think this is really one of the things that I wanted to bring to the table is, we're talking about different types of therapy, different types of people that need therapy. I mean, it can be from a victim of crime. It can be, it hurts my heart to hear this 8-month-old is needing. That just is so sad. But unfortunately, this world is not always a kind one. But because it's been such an increase on mental health, it has been harder to find therapy, whether people be insured, underinsured, just kind of living in an area that maybe isn't close to a city. I think those of us that are, a 15-20 minute drive from a major city, like we have it a little bit easier than those that are kind of a little further out in like Western Maryland or, things like that. Or even here I'm in Southern Maryland, it's like we're here in the South, but also the providers that are out here, they're booked. So you kind of have to like go out to somewhere else. So I wanted to make sure that our followers, if you're here to look for a therapist or look for something, I wanted to talk about like, how do you know who you should go to? We're talking about trauma-informed, right? Trauma-informed therapists. Make sure that your person, that you're going to go to is either trauma-informed or trauma-trained.
Trauma-trained is a lot better. Like if someone's trauma-informed, awesome, and maybe they're on their way to get trauma-trained, someone that's actually had some sort of training, who might be in consultation, who is doing a type of therapy that speaks to the body, which is somatically, so that way they're not doing something that we call, it's like a top, I don't want to get too much into the weeds because I know it will take more than 15 minutes to explain this, but like that we're really working with the entire body, not just cognitions, and looking at that, and that you feel comfortable with.
So trauma trained. If you versus, because you'll find a therapist, it'll be like a marriage counselor. You're like, well, that's great.
Yeah.
Not really what we're gearing for here. Like, you want to make sure that the person can handle the situation that you're in. So trauma trained. And then
of course, Katie and I are both going to recommend EMDR training.
Naturally.
I think I can speak for Katie when I say we both feel very strongly that EMDR is an incredible resource. However, if there is not an option for an EMDR trained therapist, at least someone who has a specific intervention that is trauma based. And so there are other ones out there, but we would definitely recommend look for someone who's EMDR trained.
So I'm just typing in some words here in the chat box so that those of you that are watching at home, or if you're watching this on recorder, what have you, EMDR is the acronym that we keep saying, and trauma trained and trauma based. Make sure that if you're looking for a therapist, they have that. Some of the things that we also talked about was insurance coverage. You'll want to. You can also call your insurance provider. They'll provide you a list, and you kind of have to do that homework as to what you're looking for, your area, whatever. There's many people that are underinsured. Joanna, I'm gonna have you hop in here for those that are underinsured and on self-pay.
Well, so they have a lot of options, but we're excited. We have a new program here at MCVRC, and it's for all people, whether you have private insurance or state insurance or no insurance at all. We were able to get a a grant that will just pay for counseling for victims of crime. So you have to be a victim of crime, whether it was childhood sex abuse, or it can be something from the past. It can be something that's new. That's all right. And so if you are interested, we have a program that will cover the cost. We are using your private insurance or state insurance if you do qualify for that, just to expand our funds so we can cover more people. But you can call our office, and I'm sure, Sandra, you're going to put our phone number and stuff in the chat, and our website. And,
I guess I could do that.
Thank you. And so I know people who have been looking for counselors, haven't been able to find a counselor. I know oftentimes there's a wait list. Please call our office. We do provide legal representation, of course. We're happy to do that, as well as also refer you to this program. So please do that. It's available, for the central Maryland area. So as far south as Waldorf, as far north as Frederick, and then the greater Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area in person. But we also have the option to do virtual as well for people who are a little further removed, or if it just fits your schedule better and it's easier to do. So we're excited to have that opportunity, because we have so many clients who are seeking therapy, who are seeking help, who want assistance and either can't find it, can't afford it, or numerous other reasons. So please do give us a call if you are interested.
And if I can just chime in real quick on from what I've experienced on my end, make sure when you're seeking out that therapist, the trauma trained, if it is a traumatic issue that you're engaging with a therapist in, the trauma trained, because what I've seen is I have had clients that have gone and said, "Oh, I tried therapy and it just didn't work," and then that's the end. And it's because they didn't seek out the right type of therapist that they needed for the situation in which they were dealing with. So you may find a therapist that has 50 openings on a Friday, and that's great. Oh yeah, I can do a Friday, and you take that. But then I think you're really taking steps backwards, because if you're already hesitant about going and speaking about what it is that's causing you to stick in this place, or to still experience these things within your body and in your mind and your lifestyle, that if you get, I don't want to say a bad taste, but that's the only thing that comes to my mind. You get that bad taste in your mouth and, oh, this just isn't going to work. Not every therapist is a fit, but at least the one thing you should really try to do is get a trauma trained therapist when you're dealing with the PTSD or anything that has caused you trauma that you want to get therapy regarding. That's just my 2 cents as a lay person over here, but I've seen a lot of that come back, and that didn't work. They didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you go to a dentist, you have a bad experience, you're just going to give up on your teeth. I mean, you find another dentist that is, a better dentist, a better fit, that maybe is a little bit more gentle and a little bit on your, so just the same. I mean, thanks for that. It's not always a fit. So I appreciate you bringing that up. There are pro bono counseling services that are available. There are other nonprofits. I mean, you do have to qualify. They might have different criteria. They might not be what you're looking for, but it is an option. There's peer-to-peer counseling, right?
Yeah. And there's one that I found at, it was a psychotherapy networker that was in DC this year, and they are a new nonprofit called Act Now. And I can't get my YouTube to join the chat, so I can't put that link in there for you, but I'll give it to Sandra later. And they do, they help with some payments for therapy. I think it's similar to pro bono counseling. We work with some grant called Change the Conversation. And so it's great because it will help with copays. It'll help with full payment. But they pay us so that way we can see clients. And something that Mary Beth, I wanted to like send hearts, like as if we were on like Google Meet or something, because I love what you were saying. A lot of folks, they go to get treatment, but they have complex trauma where they've had like developmental trauma throughout their lifetime. And many trauma treatments, even EMDR, if you don't know about complex trauma, really won't be able to support that as well. You want something called like internal family systems, which I could go on through the weeds with that one, and I won't. Another, this isn't therapy, but a really interesting resource that I think people would appreciate in being able to find a therapist or a type of therapy that works for you. Our owner, Rachel Harrison, has a podcast called The Mental Health Entrepreneur, and that is based on the problem of not having enough services in the nation, not having enough therapists where people need help and there's wait lists everywhere. And so it's looking at different types of therapy and how it can meet you with what you need. So also check that out, because you might find something very cool, like nature-based therapy, or equine therapy, or even virtual reality therapy with a trauma-trained therapist, and be able to like, oh, I didn't like, Katie down the street. She was like too funny. But this nature-based therapist, like that was my fit. And so there's a lot of different things out there.
I love that. Love that. And I'm going to share this other link that we talked about.
One of our partners in our, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Mary Beth.
One of the partners in our firm, Alicia Hawk, is a board member on Change the Conversation. So if there's any questions, if there's any way that we can try to help to get you into, engaged with Change the Conversation, don't hesitate to reach out to me as well. And Alicia's right next to me and we work like this together. So if you need anything on that, you can certainly contact me on that.
I love that. They've been wonderful to work with, and they were actually on our podcast as well, and they're just lovely people who are there for a really good reason.
Thanks for that. I'm going to drop this other link that we talked about, which is findtreatment.gov, for those that are searching. And like Katie said, there's so many different kinds of therapy. It doesn't have to be this traditional verbal therapy. You can start anywhere you feel comfortable. It could be in a group. It could be with horses. It could be, we did art therapy last year as an introduction. There's music therapy. There's all kinds of ways that you can kind of feel it out, and your journey, for those of you that need it, your journey gets to be your own, and you get to make decisions, and you are empowered to do what it is that fits you and see the people that fit you. And we are here to, Alonso's asking what the name of that podcast is again.
It's called The Mental Health Entrepreneur. See, I said it really well the first 3 times, and that 4th time I a little rough, but you can get it on, all the podcast channels, but it's really great. It's by Rachel Harrison.
And I did look at it last time we chatted, but so that's all the information that we have. We have, like I said, there's pro bono, there's all that. So if you are at home and you're like, what, I need help, and you need help, call one of us, call MCVRC, call trauma specialist, call general law. We will help to connect you, even if that's not with it. Because the important thing right now is for people that have PTSD, or people that care about someone with PTSD, have the resources to go out into the world and find what they need to help them to heal and, get on their journey, get unstuck, all the things, open the box when and if they're ready. And we're all here to help, which is why we did this entire thing. So with that, we have officially run out of time. Even though we started 5 minutes late, I'm going to let you guys do a little quick wrap up. We'll just go around in a circle again. Joanna.
All right. I don't have much. Just to remind people to call Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center if you need help with a criminal case being represented as a victim, or if you're looking for counseling as a result of being a victim of crime. Please give us a call at 1-877-VICTIM-1. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Katie?
I'm just seeing all the it took me a while to see the comments. I just scrolled all the way up. So sorry for those, but luckily Sandra's on that. So thanks for having us. This is wonderful. I love this experience and I love all the information that you put out there. If you need a trained therapist, feel free to come to Trauma Specialist of Maryland. And we're actually in a couple states, Delaware and Pennsylvania as well. And keep tuning in and show this to your friends and loved ones so that way they can get some of this information too. We got to get the information out there.
That's right. And I'm going to go again, Christine.
I don't have a whole lot to add except that there is hope. And for those of you out there listening, wondering if there's hope for you, there is hope for you. And we're here to walk with you along the way. There's so many wonderful foundations here to walk with you along the way. Reach out if you need us.
Thanks so much, Christine. And Mary Beth.
And I actually was going to say the exact same thing, but maybe a little different. I was just going to say that the most important thing I want to say is nobody's alone. Whether you know me or you know Sandra or you know Chris, it doesn't matter. You're not alone. There are people to help. There are people to support. There are people to be your advocates. And we're here. Jenner Law is based in Baltimore, but I'm everywhere. So you can always give me a call. I'm the only Mary Beth in this firm. So if you ask for Mary Beth, you're going to get me. It's 410-413-2155.
I don't think they could handle more than one Mary Beth anyway.
Yeah, no, that's why.
So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate all the information that was provided. I knew that we could fill up 1 hour easy. I really tried to keep us kind of on task. I hope we answered all the questions that you guys have out there. But if you have additional questions out there, please send them in, comment, message us on our social media, however you need to get us, whatever feels good to you. Call on the phone, send an email, whatever it is you want to do. I'm happy to receive any contact that you have. Again, our Paths for Healing with the Herd is on June 30th. We hope to have some additional sessions coming up. I am looking into doing yoga therapy just as a way to do movement and incorporate therapy into that and cleansing the soul. Look for that in the fall. And I am behind on my Paths for Healing sessions this year. I apologize. My plate has been super duper full. So bear with me. I'm still at it. If you guys need us, you know where to find us. And please share this video. You never know who you're going to help in sharing this video. You could be helping your neighbor or someone down the street or someone you grew up with. You just never know. And next month, we are doing bereaved parents. So Roberta Roper will be joining us next month for our Lunch and Learn. Okay. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.